There is a kind of grief that we don't talk about. It's not the grief of losing a person, it's the grief of losing a version of yourself. The grief of the woman that you almost became, the woman you were slowly turning into without even noticing. Not because you were lazy and not because you didn't want more, not because you didn't have dreams, but because you were leaving somebody else's script so long that it started to feel like your own handwriting. And today, I just want to speak from the heart because I've been thinking about the woman I almost became. And I realized I'm not just grateful that I got out, but I'm grieving what it cost me to get out. I am I am grieving the years. I am grieving the silence. I am grieving the shrinking. I am grieving the version of me that I buried to stay good. So if you're watching this and you've been feeling behind, not because you're incapable, but because you spent a decade behind the responsible one, behind the good one, behind the one who doesn't cause problems, I need you to know you're not behind. You might just be in the middle of a very honest awakening. And awakenings come with grief. I grew up Haitian, and in immigrant households, we don't just raise children, we raise project. We raise proof that the sacrifice that we made was worth it, proof that the move was worth it, proof that the family name is protected. And in that environment, being good isn't only about manners. Being good is about survival. Being good is don't embarrass us, don't talk too much, don't be difficult, don't bring shame, don't give people a reason to talk. So the girl becomes controlled. The girl becomes careful. The girl becomes the kind of woman who can handle everything, but quietly. And that's what people praise. They praise you for being strong. They praise you for being mature. They praise you for not needing anything. But sometimes that praise is a form of abandonment because your praise for not having needs, your praise for not being a problem. And then you learned, if I'm easy, I'm loved. If I'm quiet, I'm safe. If I achieve, I belong. And you don't realize you're learning to disappear. I want you to picture her, the woman you almost became. The woman who would have spent her whole life being a retirement plan. The woman who would have spent her whole life translating herself, making herself smaller so that other people could stay comfortable. The woman who would have died with her music still inside her because she was too busy being good. That is grief. And it's not dramatic grief, but it's real grief. Let me tell you a story that still does something to my chest when I think about it. The allowance from my own paycheck story. Because this is one of those moments where you don't just learn a lesson, you learn a belief system. And I remember the energy of having your first job, that pride, that excitement, that joy, that feeling like I did it, like, this is proof that you're stepping into adulthood. And I want you to imagine the version of me walking into that family meeting, not arrogant, not disrespectful, but proud. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, this is the beginning of freedom. my first job. This is the beginning of me being able to make my own choices. This is the beginning of me able to breathe. And then I was told that I needed to hand my paycheck over. I was told that my money wasn't really mine. I was told that I would receive an allowance from my own work. I need you to understand how quiet that moment was on the outside and how loud that moment was on the inside, because something happens when you realize that my hard work doesn't buy me freedom here. It buys me more control. And the grief isn't only about the money. The grief is about what died in that moment. The girl who thought effort equals independence. The girl who thought, if I do the right thing, I get to leave. That girl took a hit. And I didn't have the words then, but I have the words now. That moment taught me a version of love that was purely transactional. We love you when you produce. We love you when you obey. We love you when you contribute. And a lot of immigrant daughters have this story in very different forms. It's not always money. Sometimes it's your time. Sometimes it's your choices. Sometimes it's your body. Sometimes it's your voice. But the theme is the same. The theme is the same. Your life is not fully yours. And then you swallow it because you don't want to be ungrateful. You don't want to be seen as disrespectful. So you comply. And years later, you're trying to build a life that feels like yours, but you still feel guilty for choosing yourself. That guilt, it has a history, and grieving that girl matters because she deserved to be proud. She deserved to feel free. Let me talk about another grief. The grief of being the golden child, the straight A child, the one who doesn't need help. The child who was praised for being independent, but left alone when she was hurting. When you're the one who achieves, people assume that you're always fine. They assume that you're strong. They assume that you don't need softness. So they don't check on you deeply. They don't ask how you are doing emotionally. They just clap when you win. And you learn to perform wellness. You learn to hide your pain. You learn to handle things alone. And the grief is this. There was a version of me who could have been stuffed. A version of me who could have been held. A version of me who could have said, I am not okay. And been met not with advice, but with care. I grieve for that girl because she learned that love comes with conditions. She learned that attention comes when you achieve. But when you're hurting, you should be quiet. You should be grateful. You should be strong. So you become resourceful. But resourceful becomes exhausting when you never get to rest. And that's why sometimes as adult women, we don't know how to receive. We don't know how to be supported because we were trained that being supported makes you weak. I am grieving that. I am grieving that not with anger, but with tenderness. Because she did what she had to do. She survived. But survival is not the same as the living. Now, let me say something that might touch a deep place for some of you. There is a part of my grief that doesn't have a name in the books. It's the grief of the girl who was taught to apologize for the sun on her skin. Colorism is a specific kind of heartbreak because it steals your childhood. While other children are just being children, you're being measured, you're being ranked, you're being compared to a standard that you didn't choose. And it teaches you something that is so cruel, that your shade, your beautiful brown skin is a limit, that your beauty is conditional, that you have to make up for your skin with usefulness. So what do? You become smart as a shield. You become an overachiever. You become helpful as a shield. You become useful as a shield. Because if they're not going to see you as beautiful, you will force them to see you as valuable. And I need you to hear me. That is a survival strategy, but it comes with grief because you weren't allowed to be both. You weren't allowed to be brilliant and adored. You weren't allowed to be dark and celebrated without question. So you buried softness under books. You buried your desire to be seen under achievement. And now, as an adult, you look at photos of that little girl and you see a masterpiece, but she saw a mistake. That gap is grief. That is the grief of the woman you almost became. The woman who would have gone her whole life never loving her reflection. The woman who would have kept hiding her face. The woman who would have built a whole life behind the scenes because she didn't feel pretty enough to be visible. And I'm going to say something gently but directly. If you're building a business but you're afraid to put your face on camera, if you hide behind a logo, if you keep delaying visibility, sometimes it's not strategy. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's the echo of an old wound that is saying, don't let them see you. And I'm here to tell you, that's not your voice. That is old programming, and you don't have to keep carrying it. There was another moment standing in an unemployment office, looking at the database, looking at my options and feeling this strange awareness. I'm deep into a life that I did not fully choose. I followed the script. I did what was expected. I was responsible. I did everything right. And I still felt like I was auditioning for my own life. That moment wasn't just about work. It was about identity. It was the moment that I realized if I do not choose myself, no one will. And I don't say that in a bitter way. I say it as an adult truth, a grown woman truth. Because immigrant daughters can spend their whole life being the answer and never being the dream. And I remember grieving not loudly, but internally. How much time did I spend being palatable? How much time did I spend being useful? How much time did I spend earning love that should have been free? That's the grief of the woman I almost became. The woman who would have kept doing everything for everybody while slowly disappearing. And here's the part I want to speak from my heart about. I didn't fix this overnight. I didn't wake up and become a new person. It was a slow turning, a slow choosing, a slow shedding. But I will always say this. The fact that you're grieving means you're waking up. Because numb women do not grieve. Women who are still asleep do not grieve. Grief is a sign that you can finally see what happened without minimizing it. And that's powerful. That's powerful because once you can name it, you can stop repeating it. You can stop rescuing the old you by staying in the same cycle. You can let her go with love. And you can say, thank you for getting me here. But you can't go where I'm going. If you're watching this and you feel behind, I want you to consider this. Maybe you're not behind. Maybe you're just finally introducing yourself to the woman you were always meant to be. And yes, there's grief in that because you're going to mourn the time, the silence, the shrinking, the version of you who survived instead of lived. But I want you to know something. That woman you almost became, she served her purpose. She helped you survive. But she is not your final form. You're allowed to be bold now. You're allowed to be seen now. You're allowed to choose yourself now. And if nobody has told you this lately, I'm proud of you for waking up. Because waking up is not cute. It's holy. It's real. It's the beginning of a life that finally belongs to you. All right, y'all. That was day 56. I'm Webley. I show up here daily, imperfect on purpose, so Black women, especially immigrant Black women, see proof that you can start ugly, skip the tech drama, and build your next stream of income online. If this helps, subscribe because I will be back tomorrow.